was introduced to the guild by Bob Royce, and he's a phenomenal turner. He's a technician, really nice shapes. He's going to talk tonight about drying, the art of drying. There's all kinds of different ways that you can approach drying your wood. So, and Steve is also going to do the critique at halftime. We'll go for about an hour or 45 minutes, take a break. Steve will do the critique and then come back and finish the demo.
Dan is volunteering to fill in for Lars, who's away this week. We've got a yellow legal pad sign-up sheet. He stickered all the pieces. Please make sure that you find your piece and put your name at least, so we can get a gallery going. We're going to screw it up without Lars, without a guarantee. But Dan's got a better chance of getting it right than I do.
Okay, Chris.
Thank you, Steve.
I have a really loud voice.
There's a speaker's right behind you. You're feeding into the speaker.
Okay.
Now.
I will need to be able to walk over there at some point.
Just walk fast.
Walk fast. Chris, you've already got some stuff wrong. I hate to say it. I'm not an original member of the club. I joined in, I don't know, 2000.
Yeah,
maybe.
That's close enough.
Some of the Alan's been around since, what, 1980 or something? Yeah, I mean, 94, so there you go. So good. What I want to talk about tonight, particularly, is kiln drying. Something we haven't really talked about in a while. I understand that the club did have a program on this maybe 11 years ago, because I haven't heard one since I've been here. But the beer cooler kiln that you see over there, I bought from Alan Leland, who got it from another turner who I think built it maybe in a breakout session or something that the club had after somebody talked about how to dry with kiln. I like to think of this as a zero footprint kiln, because it goes up on top of whatever you've already got on the floor of the shop. It's not very good, it's not very well insulated, there are a lot of problems with it. A much better arrangement would be a refrigerator or a dishwasher or something like that, but all of those have a footprint on the floor.
Did you get your money back from Alan then?
Well, here's the deal. I decided, okay, I'm going to build me a kiln. And I went to the hardware store and got a price of switch and a rheostat and some of the hardware you see inside. The light bulb and the fixture and so on. And not expensive, maybe 20 bucks. And Alan said he'd sell me this one for 10. He thought they have lots and lots and lots of 12 volt and 1.5 volt fans for the insides of computers, but they had one that's 110 volts. So that's the best choice for this kit. Okay. You see the thermostat. This is an indoor-outdoor with a cord, and you see the pickup. Lots of different thermometers. I think there's some that are kind of like the dualies on a barbecue grill that you can push through the wall. Those probably work fine. I'm not sure about the wireless ones, because this does get a little bit hot, and I don't know how well that stuff holds up. What you don't see in there is a humidistat. I'll talk later about what the guys who drive lumber have very complicated humidistats, wet bulb, dry bulb thermometers, and computers that do the math and all the rest of it. Those things cost about 100 bucks. I'm not going to put $100 into this kiln, $10 kiln, and then some ways to kind of work around the humidistat for the small quantities of wood that I have. You can recognize some of the other homemade fixtures. This was Grandma's oven, I guess. I don't know. But feel free to take a look and see how this works. What I've got on the table, and let me see if I can get positioned so I don't get a lot of feedback, are a number of bowls that were in the tree in March. These are kiln dried, they're stable, they're done. These two have been boiled and bleached. This is Mike Mahoney's finish. This is his walnut finish. This is another tongue oil finish that has some order in it. This one's been boiled as well. Reasons that I'll talk about in a minute. What you see in the bottom of this one is mineral stain. This is good old southern soft maple. So at the center of some of these trees you get a stain that looks like this. It doesn't come out with boiling. It still stays a little bit with bleach, but it's not the fungal stain that we'll talk a little bit about later on tonight. This one has not been boiled, it's just been kiln dried. It's interesting to me to get a little bit more of the different kinds of coloring with the piece that hasn't been boiled. The water, the boiling water actually ends up a nice red color, so you're bleaching some of the color out of your piece. So I wanted you to take a look at those. This is a small piece, same tree, same arrangement. It's what they call bright white maple. Just got an oil finish on it. There's no stain in it. There's no drying defects. And this is the kind of finished piece that I'm trying to get, or I at least want to have the choice of going for this. This is another piece of maple. This is northern maple. It was on the ground a couple of years. There's a little bit of smoke, and there's also some fungal stain in it. And I'm holding up this as kind of a negative example because it's personal. I like this better than this as wood. So yeah, if I'm going to eat salad, I'll eat it out of this before. What I've got down here are similar positive and negative examples. Here's the same tree, boiled pieces. What you see on this is a little bit of mold. It's not fungal stain, it's like bread mold. It's on the surface. I hope I got it in the kiln and got it dried quickly enough before it went too deep. I expect to be able to turn it off so that I end up with a finish like this. But one of the things about boiling is if you do boil your pieces in weather like yesterday, not today's weather and not last week's weather, but yesterday's weather, they will end up looking like bread mold. Okay. This is another piece. This is one of the things that we know to do with pieces that we're going to turn in grain is go ahead and turn them into cylinders. This was a cylinder that I turned and set to one side before I fooled with it, and this was back. I had a chance to do anything with it. This was back in, was it early May? We had the tour. Was it early May? I think we had the. Let me do without that until we get over there. Then we had the 2 or 3 weeks of really sweaty weather. The Raleigh spring has been weird because we have days of 90 degrees, 90% humidity, and we have days of 70 degrees and 50% humidity. It's completely different. Well, this was one of those high humidity days, and this piece started to mold a little bit. There was a companion piece like this. I want to see how far down it went. It went about halfway down the piece, so I just threw it away. This is this wood term it is. It has the fungal stain and a little bit of smoking. Boiling didn't do anything to it. It was kiln dried and it finished out.
Steve, when you're talking about boiling,
talk about it later, like when they get in water.
I'll talk about more about that later. Not much. That's a whole other subject, but I will say a few things about it. This is cherry pearl that I put in the kiln with these guys and actually left in the kiln for a couple of cycles. So it's kiln dry, and you can get an idea of the kind of movement that you get between green turn and kiln dry. This is a piece, some of you may have seen my thin wall turning demo. I had more of this maple, and this is fungal state. Maple, of course we know sugar maple, we know maple syrup, even the ordinary red maple trees around here, I think have a fair amount of sugar in them, or at least fungus thinks they're delicious. And they jump on them, and they run all the way down through the log in just a matter of days. That's what happened with this one. I've got this up as a negative example because I really wish that it hadn't done this. There's of course ways you can go in and put texturing or color or one thing or another on this and cover that up. And many of us think that this is a pattern that we want to accent rather than to try to suppress. That's fine, but I want to be able to have the choice of having this not happen if I don't want it. I just don't want it by default. And a couple of other pieces up here. This is a piece that's up at the front desk, and it illustrates many of the things that concern me about, well, the early bowls and pieces that I turned. You can see that it's out of round and it's begun to crack. My sense is that this is a great learning piece, but we probably don't want to sell pieces like this, especially if they're brown when we sell them, and after a couple of months or a year, they end up looking like this on the table. This was turned by Rich. He works in the chip shop. Probably quite a few years ago when he was learning to turn, and he's just found a home here at the craft center. But I have it as another negative example. There's another negative example over here. There's this bowl here. I'm not sure what the story is. But you can see the turner. The turner here obviously was using green wood, and by the time he was done, he had a football instead of a bowl. And well, and if you look at the edge, we've got a boat. Clearly, he needs to return this, squirt it up when it's dry, and the bowl is really, he can be proud.
Why? I picked it up from about Woodburn this weekend.
Well, the problem, I think the problem that he'll have when he returns it is that the walls are too thin, and he'll just go right through the walls. So he's just going to have to live with what he's done. The joke, of course, this is David Ellsworth. He's a master. And he knows what he's doing. He knows he's turning greenwood, and has gotten this piece, which is a wonderful piece. But my pieces are square, right? Okay. So feel free to handle any of these. Take a look at them. I'm about to do something that I hope will be a little bit fun. I practiced doing it last week. The idea is that I will turn a piece of really green wood incorrectly. I will make walls that are uneven thicknesses. I will not do some things we can do to keep walls from cracking. And I will then I will use this room as a kiln. We're about 70 degrees and about 70% humidity. And all I'll do is change the airflow. I'll put it on a fan. And the goal will be to see if it'll crack under those conditions before we finish the meeting. Okay? Now, I was all set. I'm ready to go with this. And all I needed was a piece of clear, fresh cut wood. I was up in Virginia and I was getting some other wood, and this locust tree was on the ground. I had never turned locust before, and I had never looked it up in some of the books I'll show you in a few minutes. But I jumped on it and got it thin-walled and thick-walled and put it under the fan, and a week later it has not cracked. Damn. Looked it up. Locust is one of the woods that is very, very stable. It's like mesquite and some others that don't move. Barking up the wrong tree, guys. So, the takeaway is, if you're going to get up in front of this booth and demonstrate, you need to vet it first. Happily, I've done that, so we're not going to wait that. What I've got instead, and I will try to turn this thing real quick light, is a piece of cherry. I got it from L.B. Jackson yesterday. It was in the log today, and it probably will get, it'll get me wet, it might get y'all a little wet, but not for long. You will dry, it will dry. Let's see what we can do real quick. I can see through that face shield. Yeah. With my glasses.
Oh, X-ray vision.
There you go. Yeah, all right. There you go. I ran out of time. So I messed my face shield up this afternoon, turning this wood. And so all I'm going to do is, real quick, make the outside and make the inside, and then we'll try to crack it. Putting it under the fan for the night. I had thought I could put it in the kiln, but that's probably not extreme enough for it. So let's see what we can do with this.
Steve, you want to hit your mic again?
Did that? Okay. Okay. Some of you know I'm a stubby guy, so everything about this blade is wrong. Did somebody turn it off? Got assistants turning it on earlier. Okay. I don't usually turn backwards, but I cut the tendon and thought I'd just leave it on like that. So bear with me as I do things a little bit humble here. when Elby gave me this piece, I said, Elby, this is a gorgeous piece of wood. You sure you want me to mess it up? He said, well, I saw the bark inclusion in it, and he said you wanted it to crack, so it probably will. I think I heard. I didn't hear David Ellsworth's presentation, but I think I heard somebody describe his approach being turning a tenon for the chuck, and then turning the base of the piece the size that you think you've been wanting. So that the tenon disappears, you start with the base. You don't try to make the base out of the tenon, or you don't limit yourself to the tenon from the base of the piece. Any questions about what I've done so far? Cherry, unlike locust, probably cracks as easily as anything to work with. You can break a good cherry bowl very quickly. You have to be fairly careful with it to keep it from cracking. So we'll just. What I want to do is make a curve inside that is a larger diameter than the outside, so it's thin on the edge and then end up with a really thick bottom. I used to make a lot of bowls that way. I didn't realize I was doing it. But here we are. Okay, how are we doing over there?
We're doing great.
All right. This is about a 10-inch bowl. If I wanted to save it, I would start being pretty careful with the edge thickness. About this point, this looks like about an inch. And the rule is 10%. It's 10 inches in 1 inch. What you see going past the white stuff in cherry and sapwood and the dark stuff is heartwood. And heartwood and sapwood have different moisture contents. One's a lot wetter than the other. So if you get one right, then you likely will crack the other. So let's go ahead and get the rest of the way to this. think I've made enough mistakes, almost, with this thing. You see the real thin edge? And we've got that much right here. So what I'll do is just smooth that inside just a bit. Some of the chatter, there's a lot of knots in the course of the bark and the rest of it in there, so it's a little bumpy ride. Oh, sure. Yeah, you're going right there. That's a good idea. Really wet wood will compress nicely in a chuck and then kind of relax. So in 10 minutes, well, you saw I got about half a turn on the chuck. I think it was probably fun. It was a very good suggestion. I'm not going to go very fast. I'm very, very aware of that. But we don't need that as part of the dinner. Oh, good. All right. This really would be a good goal. Lots of interesting things happening with it. You've got, this is natural edge turn from the center so that the blade is the oval in the middle instead of big on the other direction on the ends. And we've got nice clear sapwood. This tree was cut in the summer so the bark comes off, especially when you pull it. If you want it to stay on, then you cut it in the winter or you glue it. What I would do with this pole is what I did with some of those. Go ahead and let it dry. And then get my carving tools and work the edge, work the curve a little bit. I think that kind of curve, this kind of curve looks well, it adds something to the look of a bowl on a dining room table or wherever. But I didn't do that. And I'm not going to do the next step that you already know to do, and that is seal the end grain. I use paste wax, just hardware store paste wax, here, and here, and here, so that the end grain will slow down as it dries and catch up a little bit with the side grain, or will slow down to the side grain. The side grain will always dry more slowly than the end grain, so you need to even it out a little bit so you don't get drying stress in the whole thing.
Can you explain why the end grain dries faster than the side grain?
Oh, we'll do a lot of that. We're almost done with the interesting stuff. Chris and I share the same thoughts about sealing bowls when we turn them, and I told him, we got together a couple of weeks ago, and I told him I use paste wax on my bowls. I use N-Seal only into my logs. And he said, well, I use N-Seal only into my bowl. Chris, how can you do that? That stains your bowls. He said, well, no, it doesn't stain mine. You got a recalcitrant president here.
Special wine wood doesn't.
In fact, well, Chris turns dark wood in a lot of them, so you can't see the stain. It's there, and sometimes it's imperceptible. I picked that hit up from Dale Larson because I was in classes like this at the Winter Symposium back in Richmond, and I was listening to him talk about how he did his bowls, and he said he uses paste wax on the end grain and N-Seal on the end. I said, well, why can't I'm going to have a president named Chris, and he's going to say I use N-Seal, how come? And he says it stains. So this is Dale. Dale is talking to you, Chris. These guys, you can sort of see the wax. So they all have the wax on them. I don't know. I tried it one time on some light wood, and it had a little bit of a stain, and I thought, well, Dale Larson's right. But
Nice wax. Chris is wrong.
yeah, whatever. You could probably melt. You could probably use paraffin, but I think paraffin will stain as well. And it kind of goes into the wood, has a little bit of color to it. So it's kind of up to you. So let's start our kiln now. No cracks. We've got a nice bark inclusion. When we finish the wood, we could fill that with epoxy or limited defense for you. Fill that with epoxy and end up with a nice piece. We wouldn't have to worry about that. But let's do our thing here. And, I think the fan over there. Okay. The fan is turned on. You'll see the fan in the kiln. We'll talk about how fast it needs to be. This is way too fast. This is how I dried my first batch of wood, and I cracked it all to pieces. So I'm giving it an hour, and it should already be showing signs of being checked.
part just got easier.
Excuse me?
I said, I guess this part just got easier.
Yeah. His job's got easier. Mine's gotten a little bit harder because what I need to do now is talk about all the whys and wherefores of what I'm doing there and there and over there in a way that can make some sense out of it, but won't get any idea that you've covered everything. There's a good bit of practice that goes into all of this, and I would say, if you like it, start experimenting on pieces that are experiments, and gradually you'll start working out your schedules to work out how you want to build your film and so on. And you'll start getting finished pieces right in a couple of months instead of a year. There's some good books about wood. Since I gave him a hard time earlier, Ellsworth's books, I don't know if this was something I'll talk about last month, but he spends quite a bit of time, as you know, he works with green wood, and he spends quite a bit of time talking about how to manage green wood and harvest it and secure it and stabilize it and the rest of it. Very good layman's discussion, and I would recommend it. Do we have a copy of Ellsworth's book? No. Well, then I would suggest that you give her a hard time until she buys one.
That's never, ever a good idea.
There you go. Okay, there's a book that I'm going to talk about a lot tonight. This is the Dry Kiln Operator's Manual. It has a supplement that has a bunch of drying schedules for all kinds of woods and all kinds of thicknesses of woods. Lots and lots of woods, lots of schedules, lots of technical stuff. The wood products guys at NC State teach a dry kiln operator short course. I feel like those guys at the Bulls game. There you go. Okay. I think funding has run a little low on it, and the furniture industry in North Carolina has become as faded for some years now, so I don't know how much of that to do anymore. I ended up at that course back in 2008, 2009, somewhere along there. This is the Bible for the dry kiln operators who make boards. So there are a lot of things that we can take away from this that are very helpful for us, and a lot of them that are really, really, really long, because boards are different from bolts. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Talk a little bit more about that. Okay. Okay, when I started turning wood, and this was 2000, 1999, 2000, so over there, I was told to get a chainsaw. The stuff said, if you have a chainsaw, all the wood you turn will be free. So Bob Royce is an accountant, got trained, and I real quick jumped in, bought a chainsaw, and started sawing up logs. As it happened, Hurricane Floyd came around the same year, and so I promptly cut up a couple of tons of wood, stacked it up, and got busy. I didn't have to do it that way, and I still don't. I could have bought kiln-dried lumber from a lumber company. Capital Lumber sells four corners dry hardwoods for a price. They're pretty high. There are a couple of other lumber companies that sell kiln-dried hardwoods. I think if you get 8 corners, it's going to be a 12-corner stock. I know there's a lumber yard in Indiana that will sell 16-corner kiln-dried cherry. Again, for a price. These would be board-type pieces rather than bold ones, but you can get it kiln-dried. Frank Tinta, most of his, well, he and I were talking about his platters, and he told me, well, all his platters are kiln-dried. He just got filled with drying drying wood for the kinds of platters that he makes. Because his platters have to be flat and they're relatively slow and they need to be clear. So he just buys his wood kiln dry. Terry Brown, who you've heard demonstrate here, with his spindle work, always dries kiln dry wood. So I didn't have to buy the chainsaw. They're alternatives. American Wood Yards in Raleigh, across from the fairgrounds, is run by a guy named Don. He has taken the dry kiln operators class, like me, from the same guys over at NC State. And he makes lintels, fireplace lintels, from the logs that he cuts in his yard. Those are 4 inches, 6 inches thick, and maybe 12 inches wide. And he kiln dries those as well. He does a pretty good job of them. Sometimes they get splits or whatever, and I can come there when he's trying to get rid of them. I can get a deal on some kiln dried thick wood. So that's another source if you're interested.
See?
Yeah.
I go to some lumber mills and I see this really dry 2x4 or something, and they go in one on big stack and you see steam coming out.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a wet kiln versus a dry kiln. Is that what that is? Or?
No, that's a dry kiln.
It's a dry kiln.
If you see steam coming out of it and it's in the wood yard, it's a dry kiln.
Okay.
The other type, the other common type of kiln is a dehumidifying kiln. It works kind of the same way, except instead of venting the hot moisture out through louvers, it recirculates it through the dehumidifier and pours out the bottom. But no, the process is not dry. And it's the one they use for lumber. This book and the cover on the book tells you what it's about. These are warehouses full of green boards that have to be dried on a production basis. They've stack 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 more feet of boards in these things. They run them through. They're very day in the kiln is a disaster. Also, a disaster. It cuts into your margin. For me, another day in this doesn't really matter. I'm thinking in terms of weeks or a couple of months. So my economics are very different from theirs. FedEx to you. Mike Mahoney buys bowls from Dan Bailey. And I talked to Dan a week ago. I said, "You're still in business doing that?" He said, "Yeah, but I'm getting old and it's hard work." But he said he would certainly appreciate the plug. So understand you don't have to do all this. You already know you don't have to kill dry wood. So we're talking about something that is different from what you already know works. You can be patient and let the pieces air dry. You rough them out like these. You find a place that's safe and gentle to store them where they will start drying nicely. And in about a year, you will have a bowl that has reached equilibrium moisture content for North Carolina, somewhere around 15%. I'll show you a chart about that in a few minutes, but that's what you'll get, and that's fine, and you can make your bowls and they'll be fine. If you're in more of a hurry than that, you turn one and it turns into a football or cracks or whatever, but you don't have to go to all this trouble with all your bowls. You can do what you've already done. Some of my own pieces in my shop sit for 4 or 5 years before I finish them. But that has nothing to do with the drying speed. You can also buy very good wood already sawed up in blanks from Mike Smith, who comes to the club. I don't think he's here tonight. His pieces are really very good. You can buy wood from Woodcraft. You can buy them from lots of different places on the internet. What you get are blocks that are dipped in paraffin. They're sealed in paraffin. You need to assume that those are wet. What Mike does, what most of the guys who produce that stuff do is cut them and seal them and send them to you, and you deal with them as wet wood. So if you get your wood that way, then what I talk about tonight will apply to the wood that you buy. I'm going to take a while and tell a number of stories and approach this from different directions. About 4 years ago, talking with Al Basham about, I guess, one of the guys who wrote a finishing book, maybe Flexman, wrote a book about finishing. And Al said, you know, he goes on and on and on and on and on about finishing. And at the end of the day, you wonder, all right, now what am I supposed to do with finishing? Well, I'm going to go on and on and on for a while because I have good bit to say. But in order to scotch the complaint that I don't tell you what to do, you got a handout. I've got steps 1 through whatever on how to air dry wood, and then steps 1 to whatever on how to kiln dry wood. They're over there on the table, front and back. Please help yourself. I think they're going to be on the website sooner or later. I'll send them over to be posted today with a note that it's way too late to post it, but they're available to you. So. A couple more stories. About 10 years ago, Doug Peterson, as a member of this club at the time, demonstrated, and what he said in passing that caught my interest was that with his bulbs, large bulbs that he turned out of maple, and that he would rough turn them in February, finish turn them in October, and sell them at the craft shows in November. And he said that what he would do in early October was take them out, he would load them into his crawl space. And then he would take them out and put them into this big box. I think he took 4 or 8 sheets of plywood, built a box, put fans in one end, stacked the bowls in, and the bowls had already dried for 6 months in his crawl space. And by the way, a crawl space is about 70 degrees and about 70% humidity if you've got some sort of moisture control in it. You know, the ground cover maybe a dehumidifier or something like that. So you've got even cool temperature. He has pieces in there, and then he force drives them with the fan. Dale Larson, one of the AAW's officers, said much the same thing when he was demonstrating in Richmond. After he sealed the ends with his face wax, he would stack them up and let them dry, and he lived, I think, either in Portland or Seattle. So you'll hear these guys tell stories about how they dry wood, and the first thing you have to think is that place like Raleigh, North Carolina, climate-wise? And if it's not, then it's different drying conditions. Well, he's up there, and what he said was at the end of his drying period, he puts his bulbs in a drying room, which I think was some space under a tin roof in his garage or barn. Gets hot into the sun, he turns fans on, and does really the same thing that Doug Peterson does. I learned the recommendation about putting holes inside a cabinet from John Jordan. I went to Aramont a few years ago, and I was taking a class with John Jordan, and it was my first big deal class, and I wanted to be perfect. And at the end of the day, I had a little half done, and I was going to quit for the day and come back the next day. I heard something about sealing the edges, the end grain, and so on, and I didn't want it to crack. So I told John, I'm going to go across the street and buy some lacquer and seal the outside of my bolts, so it'll be all right tomorrow. I don't know how many of you know John Jordan, but he's an amiable, generous, bright, smiling. No. Alan actually does. He took one look at me and he said, you don't need to do that. And I was like, but Jordan, you know those things crack. He said, just put it in the cabinet there and close the door and leave it, and in the morning it will be fine. And I said, okay. And he was right. What happens in still air with a piece like that is that there actually a little bit of an atmosphere that forms around the outside of the bowl, and it kind of insulates the bowl, and so that the surface moisture will be stable. And we already know that. We go to steam rooms and saunas, and we know if we sit still, it's not as hot as if we walk around. And that's always happening in John Jordan's cabinet. Just for keeping the thing still, and it keeps well enough overnight. But that raised the question. What was going on? Why was Doug Peterson and Dale Larson telling me to turn the fans on their pieces and John Jordan telling me to keep them still in a cabinet? Was I supposed to seal the ends or not? What's this business that I was hearing about putting green pieces, my fresh pieces in paper bags and closing them up, or putting them in shavings and putting in bags with shavings and swapping out the shavings and the rest of it? I was an intern. I didn't know what, I didn't understand what I was doing yet, and I was hearing things coming from all kinds of directions. I knew I just needed to learn how to dry wood, and that, of course, is why I ended up at that dry kiln operators class. It was a long week. I was the only wood turner in the room. The other guys were lumber people. I learned a lot about drying, but I learned a lot about drying lumber that does not apply to wood. And I learned that the answer to my question about what do I do with the piece I put in the cabinet, put it in the bag, or put it under a fan, what? The answer is, of course, it depends. It depends. It depends how hot the temperature is, how wet the wood is, how dry the wood is, how humid the air is, the rest of it. Lots of different variables are involved, and you need to understand those variables. So why is drying wood hard enough for us to spend most of the evening talking about it? Let's think about the things that wood is not. Okay? It's not coriated or epoxy. Those things are liquid, and then there's a chemical process that takes place, and they harden, boom, all the way through evenly, all at once. That's not wood. Wood is not molten aluminum or pewter. As those materials cool, then they solidify, they're solid all the way through. You don't have, unless you have slag on the top of your crucible, you don't have molten aluminum that has hardened on the outside and is still liquid in the middle. We've got wood that is hard on the outside and still wet in the middle. And of course that reminds us that's what happens with a couple of things. One is marshmallows. Right? You toast a marshmallow and you're real careful with the outside and you hold it careful until the inside liquefies. If you're 10 years old, you just set it on fire and blow it out and eat it. But there's a business of managing the outside and the inside of the marshmallows. And we do the same thing with clay. The folks up the hall who are doing their clay, they know their clay dries on the outside, gradually into the inside. And clay, like wood, shrinks when it dries. So they've got to manage shrinkage as well as the drying differential from outside to in. But what they don't have to manage that we do is grain. Clay doesn't have grain, marshmallows doesn't have grain, wood has grain. The lumber people, the ones who make boards, say that wood has 3 dimensions. They talk about the longitudinal axis of a board, which is across the bottom here. They talk about the radial axis, which is from the center out through the growth ring. You start at the pith and go to the edge, that's the radial axis. They talk about the tangential axis, which is tangential to the growth rings. And what they say is we don't need to worry about drying across the longitudinal axis, out the ends of the boards. We can seal those to begin with, but more than anything, the ends are little. So that most of our drying goes out the sides of the board. most of them, the side grain bowls, we turn them like this. This is in grain. This is the part that the lumber guys don't pay attention to. And it's two halves. It's both ends. And we got side grain here. What the books, the lumber books say, is that the side grain will dry about 20 times faster than the longitudinal or the radial axes. The radial and longitudinal axes dry a little bit differently. The tangential axis will dry about 1.5 times faster and shrink about 1.5 times the amount that the radial axis will see. So even within wood, there are differences in how the wood shrinks and dries. But the end grain is 20 times faster drying. Of course, wood, the shrinkage end to end in a board is minimal. So what we're talking about as we consider the way the sides of a bowl dry is not that the bowl will go in this way on the longitudinal axis. It's that the water comes out of here and pulls it from the other surfaces so that you end up with these surfaces drying more quickly than the side surfaces. Okay? So wood is different from lumber, wood is different from clay. It's different from aluminum or corian or some of those other materials. Okay, if we want to go forward with kiln drying, what we're doing in a box like this, as opposed to air drying, if we're going with kiln drying, what we're doing is controlling 3 variables. We're controlling temperature and humidity and airflow. The temperature should be straightforward enough. You see my indoor outlet thermometer and my dimmer switch on my light bulb, and I change the light bulb according to whether it's hot or cold in the shop. If your kiln is well insulated, then the inside will be more or less of an even temperature with the fan circulating the air. This particular kiln is not very well insulated and will work a lot better if I put another layer of styrofoam around it, or at least on top of it. If you're going to use that as a model, then make it thicker. A better model, of course, is an old refrigerator, which is insulated to keep cool to begin with. We're going to look at some drying schedules in just a minute, but where I generally start with my wood, if it's fresh wood, I would put this piece of wood in the kiln. I would probably start the temperature at about 90 to 95 degrees. The moisture content would need to be up about 80%. If I had 10 of these stacked in there, the air would be saturated, and we would have all the humidity we need. With just one bowl, and I probably need to add some humidity. This actually works. You can put water in the air that simply, or I sometimes put a pan of water and then hang paper towels that will trail down in it, so I have additional evaporation. Airflow. Airflow is a little tricky. if you listen to John Jordan and take it that the way to air dry a piece of green wood is to leave it in that cabinet until it dries. In about 3 days in North Carolina, you'll open the cabinet and it will be covered with mold. It's too hot, too humid. Airflow will control the mold in a drying environment. So what's the deal with why do we start thinking about putting a fan in our cabinet when the solution was for keeping my bowl from cracking overnight was still there? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Once we have closed the cabinet, we control the humidity as well. So we can circulate humid air. It's like putting a fan in a sauna or a steamer. Because the air is humid enough, then it won't crack the piece the way the air in this room is beginning to crack that piece there. How big should your fan be? I told you at the beginning this fan is too big. I asked that question, well, but at my lumber workshop, the rule of thumb was 200 to 300 feet per minute. So as the wood turner, I raised my hand and I said, how fast is that? And the instructor was so pleased that I'd asked the question, but he said, all right, 60 times 300 is how much? And of course it's like 18,000. And it's about 18,000 by 5,000, which is feet a mile. And you end up with 3 miles an hour. And of course I just sunk down in my chair because that's pretty easy math. And it's just walking speed. That's enough air circulation in a kiln to keep you from going low.
Steve, that's a question.
Yes.
So if you have mold develop on the surface, how do you deal with it if you want to get rid of it? Or what are your thoughts about mold in general as it develops on the piece of drying?
Mold, temperature is too low, the humidity is too high, and the air is not moving. So you can change to any of those variables. Or you can throw a piece in boiling water and kill it all and start over.
You said a safe fungicide in the campground. What is that?
Okay, the fungicide is for the blue stain and for some of the other funguses that grow. This bread mold business is a little bit different, and it comes up on the surfaces of your bowls. And you probably don't want to paint food items with the fungicide. Just kind of be careful with it. I paint the ends of my logs and then cut the logs and rub out the pieces, and then no more dipping the thing of fungicide. The lumber guys used to dip their lumber in something called penta. Sodium penta, something phenol. No relation to spray penta. It worked really well, and your hair would fall out if you used it. If you're lucky. It's very, very poisonous. Lots of people got really sick working with penta, so now that is out. I got on the web and started talking. I had the same question, what is this stuff you're talking about? And I wondered why these books didn't say, except they said don't use penta anymore. I found a company in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, that makes a product called Brightwood XL. It's supposed to be eco-friendly, and there's a distributor in Hillsboro, so he and I met in a bank parking lot about 8 o'clock one Saturday morning. It felt like a drug transaction, but he poured a gallon of Brightwood XL into a gas can I had, and what? Brightwood, B-R-I-T-E-W-O-O-D, XL. It works pretty well. Now, the thing you have to remember is that if your wood has fungus in it, it's there. And you paint it with fungicides and the rest of it, the fungicides will penetrate maybe an 1/8 inch. But you're full of fungus already, so you're wasting your time. You need to be talking bleach. What I do is carry my solution of bright wood into the woods. I'll cut a log and paint it. And then take it back to the house, and then I'll put anchor seal on the ends. And it has been treated and it has been sealed. And it's pretty good. For tests, I put the bright wood stuff on one end and not on the other end, and then cut the log, and I can see the gray stain growing down one end, and it's not growing on the treated end. I heard from Turner in Miami who said, well, he said it just drives him crazy, so he'll cut a log, rough turn a piece, and drop it in a 55-gallon drum of alcohol. Again, this is before anything happens to it. You know, it doesn't have time to grow fungus. He just puts in alcohol in the ready to turn, takes it out, and turns it in and starts drying. But the bright wood XL seems to be a pretty good ecologically soft product. And I think those guys maybe have big dent tanks for their lumber leaves.
I'll see what I can dig up and report by next month.
Okay, I've got it. It's 1 to 20. I bought a gallon of it. I've made up 3 gallons of it. If anybody would like a little, yeah.
I put fungicide and most of the paint fungicide along with. I know the guys at 3 different companies who manufacture stuff. I'll definitely do it. See what's good.
With Penta off the table, then a lot of these companies started finding other things. So I'm sure there are other products out there.
That's console.
Excuse me?
It's console. Don't worry about it.
Okay. We're about out of time. I want to show you some charts. I had a lot more to say, but we had more fun than that. So if I could go ahead and turn on this thing, I wanted to show you some slides that do come from the Green Book. Okay. That's the deal.
Takes just a minute for it to find it. Oh, it skipped over.
Okay. Talk among yourselves.
What did you do to make it projector before?
I did that.
It was that. There we go. Try it again. Sorry. The duplicate. Go to expand over. Which one did you choose?
Projector.
There we go. I'll look at a second. Hit source again.
What about your plain old household bleach so you have fluoride?
That's a really good question. When I have the pot of boiling water, I pour a little bleach in it because it kills stuff and it does bleach a little bit. The problem with sodium hypochlorite is it's not very strong. So if you're trying to take blue stain out, it won't do it. There's another Portland deck bleach. It's about the hardware store that's on oxalic acid. And it's stronger than sodium hypochlorite, but it's not as strong as hydrogen peroxide. So we'll take some of the color out.
Which good old household bleach is anything you're going to use. Is it turns out extremely liquid fungus? It doesn't last. So if you buy a gallon of bleach, it's 5.25% today. 2 months in the garage, you're down to 1%. What you want to do is buy a small container. If you haven't finished using it in a month or 6 weeks, or go buy another. And that's the way you want to do it. And it is instantly toxic and will kill the bleach as well. It will kill fungus in the split second. If he says not strong, that's a joke too long.
I like my 100 peroxide. There you go. There you go. Okay.
Steve, you have a question here?
Yeah, question.
As far as the mulch, what about if you just ultraviolet light to kill the mold?
I think that works. A lot of people use the lights for that, precisely that, and I have a paint drying cabinet that has the real powerful burn your eye and your retinas ultraviolet lights that seems like that works pretty well. But it's easy enough if you've got mold growing to change the environment you've got. You can jigger one of the variables, airflow, temperature, humidity, and it'll stop. And then what you do is, the next piece you put in a different place. You're running a test. It's very difficult for anybody to say how pieces will dry at your house. Because I don't know, for example, if your shop floor has been sealed or whether it's like mine and the concrete sweats. So that on a day like today, my moisture content, my humidity in my garage is like 80 or 85% because the floor is dry. Lots of people say, well, put the stuff on the floor. Well, I can't do that. So experiment around, find your spots. My crawl space with the dehumidifier never molds. And then, of course, in my attic isn't moldy. Let's look at the slides real quick. These come from the Green Book. This is an illustration of how different sections of a log will dry. This is the radial axis. This is the tangential axis. And of course the longitudinal axis is out like this. This is your nice cornerstone piece. And of course this looks like many of our bowls because we're up here toward the edge and most of what we're getting is shrinkage along the tangential axis. How do I?
What do you want to do? Just advance?
Yeah, I need to go to the next one. Oh, we can do that.
Takes a little getting used to, huh? You want me to do it?
Yeah. Give me a second. I need the next one. Yeah, we're trying to get to that. You can't read this, but it's good to know that the chart is here. The title of the chart is the average moisture content of green wood. So that if you don't have a moisture meter and you don't want to do the moisture content calculation, you can go to a chart like this, maple, soft maple, 58% moisture content in the sap, in the heartwood, 97% moisture content in the sapwood. One point we don't have time to say too much about is that wood shrinks once the free water is out of it. If you think of a sponge that you pull out of water and it's saturated, and then you squeeze it and the water runs out, that's the free water running out. But your sponge is still wet. If you want a dry sponge, you have to dry it further. Applied to wood, if you squeeze the wood, the free water is what runs out. When you get all of that out, then you're left with what's called the bound water. That's about 30% moisture content. And your wood starts to shrink at 30%. So that if when you cut a maple tree, you've got 50, 80% and 97%, and you've got a fair amount of drying to do before your board starts to shrink. The flip side is that once you see the board the bowls start to move, then you know you're down below 30% humidity or moisture content. Oak, Southern Red, 83% heartwood, 75% sapwood, which is why the oak pieces are a little bit problematic over there. Persimmon, 58%. Black walnut, black, 139%. Okay. Can we go to the, we can go to the next.
Just hit the right button.
So what's boiling do to that? Does it remove some of the sap, right?
Boiling doesn't do anything to that. All right. Maybe it increases the free water a little bit, but it doesn't change the moisture content of the cells. You will end up with a wetter piece, and you have to be careful because it's more likely to mold because it is so wet. But if you go ahead and put it in a place where it can start drying quickly enough on the surface so that the mold doesn't grow, then you're fine. This is another chart that you can't read, but it's good to know that it's out there. The title of the chart is Shrinkage Values of Wood based on its dimensions when green. So, soft maple, soft red maple at 6% moisture content will shrink 3.2% and 6.6% on the two axes. That's just total dimensions. So a 10-inch bowl by this chart will shrink 6% of the 10 inches, which is about a half an inch. Okay, this is a chart that is really important for us as wood turners, and it doesn't change because we're doing bowls instead of lumber. This is relative humidity and moisture content at different temperatures. If it is 80 degrees, well 70 degrees outside, and we are at 72% humidity, then our wood will reach equilibrium moisture content at 13.7%. That's mostly what we have around here. So that if we then pick up and send a bowl from here to Tucson, Arizona, or to Maine in the wintertime, where the humidity is maybe down 70 degrees, but maybe 29% humidity, then what we have is 6% moisture content. The piece about the 6% and the 12% is that from 30% down to 0, wood shrinks regularly. So from 30 to 15, it's half shrunk. And from 15 down to 8, it's another quarter, so that we've got 3/4 by that point. You never get down to 0. Yeah, that's the wood. Just about. That's the same chart as the one you just saw. This shows that relative humidity and moisture content. I think that's my last one. This is another version. This is where you can expect moisture content of wood to be in different parts of the country. In Wilmington, North Carolina in January, 15.7. In September at 16.8%. So we even have charts as to what the relative humidity of the wood will be in the air, in the outside air. Okay. Any questions? Chris? Have we broken our bowl yet? We're beginning to get a few little checks, but maybe on the smooth face. It did break. It will by morning. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.